It's a cool feeling to be able to say good morning, and a lot of people say it back to you. It's super cool. If we never met before, name's Adam, pastor here at Highway. Glad to see you this morning, and very excited about this sermon because it's on a topic that I just love, love, love. We started a series last week called Plot Twist, and really the series is all about stories. And no shocker here, if you've heard me preach before, you know that I love stories. I'm currently halfway through reading the book Project Hail Mary. Anybody? Yes, right. It's a great book so far. And the movie version comes out later this month, and so I just really wanted to read it because I love being that person that can smugly say, it was pretty good, but the book was way better. I just like to be that person. Love stories. I love stories. I still remember in junior high staying up with a light under my covers, right? Have you ever done that? My parents couldn't see, but I was reading Pet Sematary by Stephen King. Yeah, I remember being so terrified and repulsed, but unable to stop reading because I loved it so much. And maybe someone has asked you, like, what is your pastor like? And you find yourself saying, he's kind of weird. Now you know why. That's what I grew up with. The writer Joan Didion speaks for me when she says, we tell ourselves stories in order to live. I love that. Stories are like oxygen and water. We make sense of this chaotic and weird world through stories. They remind us that our lives are a story. Another one of my favorite writers, David Sedaris, says, if you're tuned in, life feels like a story. I love this so much. The more we're open and aware, the year of the sloth, and we're slowing down, paying attention, we realize there's no accidents. Every action and decision is part of something bigger. And stories inform us about our humanness. And one of the greatest human impulses is to play it safe, to stay where we are, what we know, and what we can predict. The author, Joseph Campbell, became famous for laying out this formula so many of our classic stories follow. It's called The Hero's Journey. He lays out 17 steps that can be simplified by the ones in this graphic right here. And the journey, if you can see there, it's split between the known and then the unknown. The main character starts in the known, okay? Frodo starts in the Shire with his friends and cozy food and houses. Will Hunting and Goodwill Hunting starts with his friends working a maintenance job, playing basketball. Dorothy is at home with her family and chores and her dog. It's the known and comfortable. But the next step in the hero's journey is called the call to adventure. A story is only a story if they step across the threshold into the unknown, hanging in the Shire, playing basketball, Dorothy doing chores. That's a boring story. Now, we understand this intuitively with our lead characters. We want them to take a step into adventure and take risks. But when it comes to our own stories, that changes because the unknown is scary. It's scary. In high school, I attended a summer camp in which one of the primary goals for students was finding a girlfriend or a boyfriend. And my buddy and I saw two girls that we were struck by, and we decided to ask them out. And we were both mostly reserved people, so to help muster up the courage, we bought and we chugged 2 Mountain Dew Ices, knowing that the sugar and the caffeine would give us the boost that we needed. And then we pumped ourselves up, and they approached, and my heart was racing, and I was desperate to take the risk, but I was also terrified of the unknown, their reactions, my words. And so my body reacted so strongly. I was so scared that when they walked by, I opened my mouth, and what came out of my mouth was not a Romeo-like sonnet, but it was a stream of projectile Mountain Dew vomit right in front of them. It's a true story. It's a true story. My buddy was very mad at me. To move from comfort to risk, to go from safe to unknown is scary. Putting ourselves out there, stepping outside of routines or norms is scary. And I wonder, in what ways have you played it safe in your life? Was there a time you felt compelled to say something or start something, but eventually you felt like the risk was too much? Or maybe there's something right now that deep in your spirit, you know it's time to stop working there, or it's time to put yourself out there in that relationship or do some missional activity you're passionate about, but it's unknown, and you have no idea what will happen. And part of the human adventure and story are moments when we're called to cross into the unknown. And throughout history in the Bible, we can't escape the reality. To experience the expansion of God's kingdom, we have to step out into the unknown. Today we're looking at a moment when Jesus does what he does best, and he tells a story, not just information or doctrine, but a story to his disciples that is a little weird and confusing and maybe even a little offensive. And so, if you can imagine with me, Jesus and a group of disciples, they're walking through the city streets. And the disciples are in awe of these temple buildings that they're looking at. They're being built right now. King Herod was constructing what's called the Temple Mount. And it would sometimes be called Herod's Temple. It was an extension of the temple. And it was mind-blowing. You can see the scale and the scope in some of these pictures here. These are from the Bema podcast. Let's go a little slower than that. Go back to that first one, Ava. Yeah. Just check out the scale and the scope. Now we can keep going. Yeah. To this day, nobody understands. You can see how big it is compared to that person. We don't even know how they constructed this back in the day. And so the disciples are looking at the size and the beauty of this, and they're so impressed. But Jesus says to them, instead of being impressed, he sort of whispers to them. He says, actually, you see these stones? They're all going to be demolished. He talks about the impending destruction of the temple, and he says a new kingdom is coming. And the disciples are confused, but they're leaning in. And then Jesus, to explain this point, he tells 3 stories right in a row to help them understand this new kingdom. And first, he tells a story about 10 bridesmaids. And second, he tells a harsh story about investments, which we'll cover today. And third, he tells a story about sheep and goats. And we're going to dig deep into the second parable, often called the parable of the talents. But it's vital to remember that this story isn't set off alone, but it's squeezed between these other 2. And we'll talk about them as well. So let's get to the second story. Jesus is sitting there with the disciples and says, the kingdom of heaven is like a man, a master who's leaving on a trip. And he calls his servants and he hands them his possessions. And to one, he gave 5 valuable coins, talents. Another, he gave 2. And another, he gave 1. He gave each servant according to that servant's ability. And then he left on the journey. So first thing to notice here, 5 coins is actually 5 talents. And 5 talents was like a lot of money, like up to 20 years worth of wages. So the equivalent of like hundreds of thousands of dollars in our day. And we have to understand the implication here. Like this was a massive investment the master was making. And even though it's not stated here in the beginning, the man is not just saying, take care of my money. It's a story of investment. Now, most of what I know about investing, I learned from Shark Tank. Everybody has a Shark Tank idea, right? That will make them a billionaire. I came up with mine years ago to solve one of life's great travesties. Popcorn at the movie theater. This is a problem. Buttery at the top, but then at the bottom, it's not buttery or salty at all. It's a big issue. So I came up with, and if you use this idea, I can sue you. Okay, I came up with the popcorn ball. Okay, it's a ball-shaped container. You shake it up, and every kernel is perfectly buttered. And again, if you steal my idea, I'll sue you. So that little image right there, I was at a retreat, and we had to come up with an Instagram account, and we came up with the Popcorn Ball Instagram. It has over 100 followers. You can find it to this day. So you can invest in this idea if you want. I'm an entrepreneur. The master, he's handing it to them in the same way we might hand our money to an accountant or to a 401k. It only makes sense when you realize it's not a passive ask. He's asking them to do work for him, an invitation to participate. So we see this further in the parable. After the man left, the servant who had 5 valuable coins took them and went to work, doing business with them. He gained 5 more. In the same way, the one who had 2 valuable coins gained 2 more. But the servant who had received the 1 valuable coin dug a hole in the ground and buried his master's money. So, if the assumption was to just take care of the money, the third servant would be doing fine. But the question we should be asking in the story is a question of investment. If you invest in the popcorn ball, like I hope you will, and I just take your money and I put it under the mattress, you'd be upset. You want to see some popcorn ball work, right? This is what the man was not doing. He was burying it. And then Jesus finished the story. Now, after a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts. The one who had received 5 valuable coins came forward with 5 additional coins. He said, "Master, you gave me 5 valuable coins. Look, I've gained 5 more." His master replied, "Excellent. You're a good and faithful servant." His master replied, got lost there. "You're a good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a little. I'll put you in charge of much. Come, celebrate with me." The second servant came forward. "Master, you gave me 2 valuable coins. Look, I've gained 2 more. His master replied, "Well done. You're a good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little. I'll put you in charge of much. Come, celebrate with me." Now notice, the amount itself doesn't matter to the master, 2 versus 5, but how these servants handled the investment. And then also notice what the master says. "Come, celebrate with me." And then Jesus tells of the third servant. Now the one who had received 1 valuable coin and said, "Master, I knew you were a hard man. You harvest grain where you haven't sown. You gather crops where you haven't spread seed. So I was afraid, and I hid my valuable coin in the ground. Here, you have what's yours." His master replied, "You evil and lazy servant. You knew that I harvest grain where I haven't sown and that I gather crops where I haven't spread seed?" And he says, "Therefore, take from him the valuable coin, give it to the one who has 10 coins. Those who have much will receive more, and they will have more than they need. But as for those who don't have much, even the little bit they have will be taken away from them." We can notice here the servant's perception of the master. Did you catch that? He says, "I know that you are a hard man." Now, we don't know in the story if the master is actually hard or not, but it's worth noting that the first 2 servants didn't say this, and then the third did. So whether true or not, the third servant thinks about the master as a hard man, and that instructs his actions. And he's afraid of what might happen. What if I lose it? What if I make a bad decision? What if I get swindled? What if? These are questions of the unknown, questions of risk. I don't know the results of what will happen. So the servant decides to play it safe, buries it. So the disciples must have been just sitting here, and they're paying close attention, and they're hearing Jesus say the kingdom of heaven is like an investment. The master will leave and will entrust you with the treasure of the kingdom. But I got to think they were confused because their master was right here. No one expected their rabbi to die soon. Of course, they didn't know Jesus was about to leave. And the treasure, his kingdom, his message, his way, it would be entrusted to this small group and a few small house churches in the area. And they didn't know that false teachers were coming. The Roman Empire would begin persecuting. Followers of Jesus would be labeled cannibals and incestuous and heretical. They'd be chased. They'd be beaten. They'd be killed. But this was the strategy, and this was the plan. The treasure of the kingdom would be passed down by normal, everyday disciples of Jesus who are willing to risk their lives, risk their social status, risk losing their families. And the normal reaction would have been to hide, to bury his message, to play it safe. There's a story, a movie called The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. When Walter was a kid, he was an amazing skateboarder and had all of this hiking equipment and these adventures he wanted to do. His dad gave him a travel notebook to take notes for these adventures. But his dad ends up dying while Walter is just a teenager. So instead of skateboarding and hiking, he cuts his hair and he starts working at Papa John's in order to provide for his family. And in silent, normal, routine ways, Walter finds himself at 42 years old, continuing to work and live, but he has never taken his adventures. And so he spaces out all the time. He's daydreaming of taking risk in relationships or standing up to his boss. But they're just dreams. And when he snaps out of it, he's back to the same old normal Walter Mitty. And oftentimes, we can trace our tendency to play it safe from a past trauma or a past wound. Maybe we put ourselves out there for friendship or romantic relationship, but we were turned down. Or we tried to start a business, but it failed. Or we dared to dream, but our dream was crushed. One of the problems with movies and stories, as much as I love them, is we can sometimes falsely assume if we dream or if we step out that things will just work out for us, right? And one of the reasons we're using this phrase, plot twist, is that's not how real life works. We dream. We put ourselves out there. We try our best. But we fail. Or someone betrays us. Nobody sees our vision. We get hurt. And then before you know it, 10, 20 years down the road, we have silently fallen into a habit of risk aversion, playing it safe, hiding our passions, burying our calling, ignoring the invitations of the Spirit into new things. Henry David Thoreau, if you remember from 2 weeks ago, the same man who escaped to the woods but still had his mom do his laundry, once wrote this truly powerful quote about humans. The mass of men, of humankind, lead lives of quiet desperation. And he wrote this in a chapter on economy. It's this picture of people who focus on money and accumulating possessions rather than living deeply, implying it's like a silent internal struggle of a lack of purpose and unfulfilled potential. In a kingdom of capitalism and commerce, we work and we pay our bills and we accumulate possessions. We send our kids to practice. We follow the script of our society. And so often we learn to silence the deep calling, the yearning in our souls. But in case this all feels like bad news and warning, we need to also see the good news in this story. Jesus tells this story to the disciples not to shame them or scare them, but he's empowering them. He's empowering them. I've talked about this before, but in Oklahoma, I grew up around lakes, and my family had a boat, and this was my dad's treasure. My family didn't spend a ton of money, so this boat was by far the biggest investment that they had. And I still remember the first year they bought it. After every single time on the lake, the whole family was required to get paper towels and lemon pledge, and we would wipe down and polish the entire boat every time. It was spotless. Now, the hardest thing about the boat was pulling it into the trailer. My dad would back down his truck and his trailer, and then you have to come all the way to the dock, get in the boat, and then drive it on perfectly, and then get in the truck, and then pull it up, make adjustments, and then do it again if necessary. But one day, I was a bit older, there was a true plot twist. He looked me in the eyes, and he handed me something. And in slow motion, I looked down, and I saw a shiny, golden boat key. And he said, "Son, you are the chosen one." I looked at him wide-eyed. My heart was beating fast. His lemon-pledged, pristine boat in the hands of an unlicensed boy. And I felt two things at once, right? I felt a little pressure. I felt nervous. I wanted to please my dad. But what else did I feel? I felt honored. I felt excited. I felt seen, like he believes in me. I felt trusted. My dad was entrusting his treasure with me. He was giving me the power and the responsibility to steward his treasure. There are two other people in the family, but he gave the keys to me. I felt important. It's vital to see that Jesus' strategy to continue his kingdom of love and justice would be through these ordinary, regular people sitting at his feet in this moment. It was not just a story of allegory, but it was practical. He was handing them the keys. He's about to leave the earth, and he's investing the treasure of the kingdom to regular people. How cool is this? If we really think about it, God generously gives his treasure of the kingdom to the early disciples, but also gives them the freedom and the trust to steward this treasure, to hide it, to bury it, to play it safe would have been detrimental to the message of Jesus. And it's really the same with us today. Julie said this last week. We're still in the now, but not yet reality of the kingdom. It's here and among us, but Jesus is not fully back. We're not fully with him in heaven, which puts us in the exact same scenario as the servants in the story and the disciples in the early church. Jesus is looking at us regular, normal people, and he's entrusting us, empowering us to invest in the treasure, to risk and multiply and steward his kingdom. He's handing us the keys. If you're like me, maybe that leads to a question like, what does that actually look like, though? This is sort of an abstract concept. How does that actually play out? Am I supposed to go door to door and tell my neighbors about Jesus? Am I supposed to quit my job and become a monk? We need to remember, again, the story is one of three Jesus told, telling about the kingdom, and the other two can give us clues on how it looks concretely. The first story is of 10 bridesmaids. And it's all about being alert and prepared, watching and ready for the movement of God's Spirit. So we can see from this story to invest in the kingdom is to not be numb, to not fall into the routine of culture, buying stuff, going to work, doing the dishes, watch the shows, zombie scroll on our phone, and basically being asleep at the wheel. That's a form of hiding and burying, is playing it safe in the Shire. We're called to be alert, to look for God's activity and listen for his whispers, to expect that the kingdom is on the move, to get off our phones, step out of the rat race, listen for the pain in your neighbor's voice, look at the news and see the injustices. Refuse to be numb, but active and alive, prepared for God's whispers and nudges. Then the third story, it makes things even clearer. Jesus tells a story about the sheep and goats, and then it's a king who separates people into the righteous and the unrighteous, and he says it like this: I was hungry, and you gave me food to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothes to wear. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me. And then those who are righteous will reply to him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you a drink? A stranger, welcome you, or neighbor, naked and give you clothes to wear. When did we see you sick and in prison? And the king will reply to them, I assure you that when you have done it for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you have done it for me. So here's another plot twist. We hear the concept of investment, and it's hard not to think in capitalistic terms of money and assets and stocks and bonds. But to invest in Jesus' kingdom is not about material things. It's investment in love. It's investment in people, and specifically the least of these, people who have less money, who have disabilities, who are strangers, aka immigrants, people who are in detention centers, people in deep depression, people who have been abused. That's the call to adventure. It's safe in the Shire. We can stay in Kansas just doing our chores, but Jesus is calling us to adventure. A kingdom of love, a kingdom of freedom for the poor, the imprisoned. And he's entrusting us, normal Shire people, to step out of a life of safety, to risk for the sake of others. Now, religious people are often so often thought to be people that play it safe. The Simpsons character Ned Flanders is a perfect example of this, sort of a default Christian character on The Simpsons. I love it. He says here, "You name it, I haven't done it." Ned Flanders will say things like, "Hi diddly ho," and very stereotypical Christian things. But another plot twist is this. That was never how Christians were like in the early days, in the ancient days. Disciples of Jesus, everything was a risk. To meet together was a risk. They were defying the empire, following a man who was considered an outlaw and was killed by the empire and government. Early disciples risked being beaten, losing their families or jobs, being killed. Throughout history, it's disciples of Jesus who stepped out of safety into disease-ridden environments to provide love and relief. It was disciples who started the first hospitals and hospices because they knew providing for the hurting was a way of providing for Jesus himself. Disciples stood up against racial injustice, refused to go to war because of Jesus' teachings on peace, leaving comfortable jobs to start nonprofits, leaving home to serve impoverished areas, fighting against slavery, sacrificing their own financial treasures and investments for eternal treasures. It's all because they were following a person who was the opposite of sheltered and safe, a person who touched the unclean, who ate meals with people he wasn't supposed to. He spoke out against the powers that were, told stories, and gave teachings that made religious people mad and authorities worried. He was a revolutionary. And this was all while being on a path of risking his very life. It's like the opposite of safe, the opposite of hiding. And so today, pretty simple question, but very deep, if we'll allow it to be. The provocative, challenging question is this: what are you doing with what you have been given? Your money, your relationships, your brain, your dreams, your peculiarities. That's a hard word to say. In what ways have you been daydreaming or caught in the quiet desperation of bills and routine, and you feel a call or a draw, but you're stuck? I do have a quick pastoral word on this note. Sometimes we hear these kind of messages, and especially for high achievers, it can make us think, I need to do more. I need to work harder. But sometimes taking a risk is actually to stop something, to quit. I asked him if I could share this, but Dave Chang was just telling our shepherds this week that in the midst of his crazy work schedule, the life of having 4 kids, a few weeks ago he took a full day and went to a Jesuit retreat center in San Ramon to pray, to be quiet, to read, to write, to take a nap. And honestly, it was inspiring for me because in a world of rush and achievement and success, sometimes the call to adventure is to get off the treadmill. It's to get out of the rat race for a while. It's because our master is not a hard man. Our master says, come to me. If you're struggling, carrying heaviness, I'll give you rest because I'm a master who is gentle and humble. When my dad handed me the golden boat key, I did feel a little pressure, but I knew my dad was not a hard man. I knew his invitation was a chance to share the adventure with me. not to force me or pressure me. There's a scene midway through The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. After he finally stops daydreaming, he steps into the unknown. He finds himself in Iceland, and he comes upon a longboard. And he does what he hasn't done since he was a kid. If you watch this clip, you can see his face. He's alert. He's alive. He's soaking in the air and the surroundings. And as we watch this, we remember this is Jesus' invitation to you and me. Not to go longboarding, though. Some of us would probably break our neck. But it's to share in a life of adventure. Because Jesus refused to play it safe. The empire killed him, and they tried to bury him, to hide him away, thinking this would stop the revolution. But Jesus showed the ultimate plot twist that what gets buried can come alive again. And so, yes, our stories are full of failures and pain. Yes, maybe we've hidden, maybe we've played it safe, but the story is never over with Jesus. Resurrection is right around the corner. New life, new adventures, new opportunities to pay attention and to tune in to the great story. So this is the invitation to us all. Our lives are a gift. Each moment we have been given life. What are you doing with what you have been given? To hide, to bury, or to invest in the venture of Jesus and his kingdom? Let's pray together. Jesus, we remember the gift that you have given us. I pray for each person that there would be a greater realization, whether they're 90 years old or they're 12 years old, that this life you've given us is a gift. I pray that you'd help us see the ways in which our lives have become this quiet desperation, where we have forgotten our calling, or we've forgotten to listen to your Spirit, and we've just gotten in this place where we are just trying to get by. I want to pray, Jesus, gentle and humble Master, would you speak to us? Would you whisper to us? Would you draw us out of the numbness? And would you give us the courage to step out, to invest, not just to live a life of adventure, but to allow your kingdom to come more to this earth? And we pray for our world, a world that is at war, a world that is harsh on the least of these. Call us into that adventure once again. This life is not just about accumulation for us, but it's serving, loving, caring for the imprisoned, caring for the immigrant, caring for the poor. May we be a church, may we be a people that is constantly looking out for all of those. Thank you for this time, Jesus. Continue to speak to us this week. Amen.